A black couple was denied honeymoon. Seats they pulled funding from the entire airline alliance. In the hush of dawn, as love promised to guide every breath, Lionel and Zara believed nothing could ever stand between them and their happily ever after. They were newlyweds, soaring on the wings of possibility, headed off on their dream honeymoon. Yet in one brutal moment, their faith in a fair and welcoming world was shattered. A single decision, delivered with cold indifference at the airport gate, would spark an outcry that threatened to topple an entire corporate dynasty. This is the story of a joyful celebration turned sour, a resilient couple challenging injustice, and the astonishing series of events that rocked one of the biggest airline alliances in the world. Lionel Montgomery, a sharp-minded entrepreneur from Chicago, and Zara Powell, a well-respected community organizer from New Orleans, had been planning their honeymoon for as long as they had been dreaming about marriage. Over the course of their 5-year relationship, countless nights found them poring over travel brochures, scouring online forums, and watching endless travel vlogs, always chasing that perfect honeymoon destination. They wanted exotic beaches, rich cultures, and a place where their love could bloom in the freedom of a brand new adventure. When Lionel proposed on a starlit boat ride along the shores of Lake Michigan, Zara's tears of joy sparkled brighter than the city lights. The wedding was an intimate ceremony surrounded by family and friends. Indeed, they couldn't wait to launch their new chapter by traveling to scenic islands in Asia. Setting off on what they believed would be a trip of a lifetime, their wedding gifts had largely been contributions to their honeymoon fund. Everyone knew traveling was their shared passion. The excitement crescendoed when Lionel booked the plane tickets. Their itinerary was to fly from Chicago, O'Hare International Airport, to Tokyo's Haneda Airport, and then hop onto a connecting flight to an undisclosed island paradise. This was not just any flight. Though they had splurged for business-class seats on United Airlines, a member of the Star Alliance, wanting every moment of their travel experience to feel special and refined, with a final click of the confirmation email, their hearts filled with anticipation and love. Friends teased them about the luxurious seats, but Lionel insisted, "We deserve it. We worked hard, saved every penny. And this is our honeymoon. We've earned this." Though they rarely flaunted it, Lionel and Zara were not just typical travelers. Lionel, after years of running a successful tech startup, had diversified his investments. Among them was a substantial donation-based partnership with a major philanthropic fund that in turn supported educational programs across several industries, including aviation. Zara, on the other hand, had spent a decade building mentorship programs in underserved communities. She guided young people toward STEM scholarships and vocational opportunities, unknown to many, including close relatives. Some of Zara's program funding also received partial sponsorship from the same philanthropic sources. In short, the newlyweds had influential ties to philanthropic and corporate investors in the aviation sector. They didn't discuss their philanthropic involvement openly because they believed in genuine service, not applause. Whenever pressed, Lionel would simply say, "We're trying to do a little good in the world the best way we can." As a result, hardly anyone at the departure gate would guess that behind Zara's stylish yet simple outfit and Lionel's unassuming travel jacket stood two individuals capable of dismantling entire lines of funding with a single email or phone call. The trouble began on a bright Monday morning at Chicago O'Hare Terminal 1, one of the busiest airline hubs in the country. Zara and Lionel arrived early, as they always did, rolling their suitcases up to the check-in counter and expecting a smooth experience. The agent scanned their passports with a friendly smile. They breezed through security checkpoints, even sharing a few laughs with a TSA officer who couldn't stop complimenting Zara's wedding ring. It was a relief, a sign that everything was going right. Until suddenly, it wasn't. At the boarding gate, as passengers lined up to enter the Boeing 787, bound for Tokyo, Lionel noticed an odd glance from one of the gate agents. The agent paused, narrowed his eyes, and consulted his colleague. Curiously, they waved the passenger in front of Lionel and Zara through, then asked to check the couple's boarding passes. Once more, Zara, feeling a spike of nervousness, complied, and handed over the passes again. The agent looked them up and down. He left without explanation and spoke to a supervisor across the roped-off area. Moments later, a uniformed supervisor walked back, his expression stern. "We need to verify a few things," the supervisor said. "Wait here." "What's the problem?" Lionel asked. He was polite but concerned. They had all the necessary documentation. They even had the bonus of lounge access, courtesy of their business class seats. None of this made any sense. "We just need to check your identities," said the supervisor. "Please be patient." Other passengers cast sidelong glances. Some shrugged it off too, absorbed in their own travels to care. Others watched curiosity, aroused, as the line behind Lionel and Zara began to clog. Everyone wanted to board on time. Tension crackled in the air. 15 minutes dragged on. Boarding calls were announced for other rows, and soon the business class queue was emptying, except for Zara and Lionel. Anxiety settled into Zara's stomach, and Lionel paced in the small, roped-off holding area, glancing repeatedly at his watch. He took a step over to speak to the supervisor, who had stepped aside. That was when he overheard the fateful words. "I just think they look suspicious. You never know these days. Better safe than sorry." The supervisor didn't realize Lionel stood just a couple of feet behind him. It was a quiet remark to a colleague, but loud enough for Lionel's ears. When Lionel pressed for an explanation, the supervisor spun around, startled. He stammered, "Didn't see you there. We need to confirm the authenticity of your tickets." Lionel's jaw clenched. "We paid for these tickets. Business class." "Directly through your airline's website. Are you suggesting something is fake?" Zara, overhearing the exchange, felt her heart pounding with a mix of anger, fear, and disbelief. She noticed how the staff's eyes darted around, avoiding direct contact. She instinctively knew this was about more than boarding passes. They were indeed singled out on suspicion of what exactly neither she nor Lionel could articulate at that moment. But their instincts screamed that this was racial profiling, plain and simple. They had done nothing but show up as themselves. Within minutes, airline security was involved. A manager from the gate wearing a crisp uniform and pressed pants stepped forward, apologized briefly, but then said the words that turned Lionel's world upside down. "I'm sorry, but we're going to have to ask you to take a later flight. We can't clear you for boarding right now." Outrage flared in Zara's eyes. "We have a honeymoon to get to. Our hotel is booked. Our connecting flights. Our entire itinerary. This can't be happening." The manager pursed his lips, glancing down at a tablet displaying the passenger manifest. "I understand it's inconvenient," he offered in a hollow tone, "but your current flight is not an option." He also hinted that a refund or a rerouting might be possible, but not until further checks were completed. Lionel asked, "What checks?" "We passed security. Our documents are in order. Our seats are confirmed. Explain to me clearly what part of us is suspicious." The manager blinked rapidly, unprepared for a direct confrontation. "We've had issues with fraudulent tickets in the past." He said lamely, "We have to maintain caution. It's in our policy to ensure passenger safety." It made zero sense. If the tickets were truly fraudulent, it would show in their system or in payment details. They had valid boarding passes. TSA had cleared them, and the seats were specifically purchased months ago with no red flags. This manager's explanation sounded contrived. Other passengers began to notice that the newlyweds were in distress, particularly when the flight's final boarding call echoed through the terminal. A couple of travelers, including a middle-aged Japanese businessman and a young woman traveling with her family, quietly asked if Lionel and Zara needed help. One bystander even approached the desk volunteering. I saw them check in. Everything looked perfectly normal. They were ahead of me at the lounge. "Is something wrong?" An awkward hush settled over the gate area. The employees seemed to flounder under the scrutiny. Zara stepped aside to call her best friend, Danielle, who was waiting in the airport lounge, but the gate agent snapped, "Mom, you can't make a call here. Please stand back." Meanwhile, Lionel's anger threatened to boil over. He had always considered himself calm, measured, and never the type to cause a scene. But right now the disrespect was blatant. He looked at the final wave of passengers filing into the jetway. "Are we not boarding this plane?" he demanded. "We paid business class. Is it because we're black? Just say it." The manager froze. He swallowed and shook his head. "Of course not. We're just following protocol." But no explanation could quell the rising tide of frustration. The clock was ticking. One by one, the plane's doors would shut. Zara's eyes welled with tears at the thought of missing the flight. She thought of the vow she and Lionel had exchanged just days earlier, to stand together in joy and sorrow forever. Now sorrow was overshadowing what should have been pure bliss. The dreaded moment arrived. The intercom clicked, and a voice announced, "Gate 14 is now closing. All passengers must be on board." Zara watched helplessly as the doors shut. The manager turned back to them, expression stiff. "We're going to have to reroute you. There's a flight tomorrow, or possibly next week, depending on seat availability in business class. We will have to verify your purchase. There might be additional screening." Lionel could no longer mask his outrage. "I want a solid reason," he demanded. "My wife and I saved for this trip. We specifically booked first-tier seats. We haven't broken any rules. What policy have we possibly violated?" That was when another agent, one who seemed less defensive, muttered under his breath, "We got a tip from someone. They said you two were acting strange." He looked remorseful, as though he had just broken rank by revealing it. But the damage was done. Lionel and Zara realized this was nothing but prejudice. They were being singled out because of an unfounded tip from a suspicious mind. Maybe they had the wrong look. Maybe someone said, "They look like they could be trouble." In any case, it was pure nonsense. Lionel and Zara returned home late that evening, exhausted and numb from the ordeal at the airport. Their dream honeymoon to Asia had vanished in the blink of an eye, leaving them stunned at how swiftly joy could turn to heartbreak. Zara cried silently as she unpacked the items she had so carefully chosen for their once-in-a-lifetime trip. Each piece of clothing she folded away seemed to taunt her. With visions of the turquoise waters and sunlit beaches they would not see, Lionel felt anger churn in the pit of his stomach, not just for himself, but for Zara, who deserved every moment of happiness a honeymoon was supposed to bring. Over leftover pizza, they spoke in hushed tones. Lionel tapped anxiously on his phone, checking emails for any apology or explanation from the airline. Nothing. Instead of an apology, there was only a cold, automated message about flight changes. Zara's tears and trembling voice tore at Lionel's heart. Normally calm and methodical, he realized that his composure had fractured. They both knew this was bigger than a simple misunderstanding. Slowly, a sense of purpose replaced Zara's despair. She recalled the philanthropic work both she and Lionel had supported, and the resources they had to bring injustices like this to light. With trembling resolve, they decided to contact Jonathan Pierce at the Philanthropic Fund, someone who could escalate their complaints within corporate and investment circles. If no one else would hold the airline accountable, they would. Gone was the naive trust that things would simply work out. They were determined to ensure no other couple faced the same ordeal. They ended the night drafting emails and gathering every piece of evidence they had. Despite their frustration, a flicker of hope glowed between them, their shared resolve to stand up together for what was right. In the administrative offices behind the gates, the manager who had refused to let them board was forced into a meeting with his own supervisors. Word had spread quickly among staff that something might have gone seriously wrong. A few employees suspected racial profiling. Others felt uncomfortable about the entire scenario. Officially, the manager insisted I was following a tip. Security told me they looked suspicious and might not have legitimate tickets. But a senior HR representative, Miss Delgado, was unconvinced. She recognized the potential for a lawsuit and bad publicity. You realize, she said carefully, that if they have legitimate documents refusing them, boarding could be a violation of both company policy and federal anti-discrimination laws. The manager shrugged, refusing to accept blame. He insisted he was just obeying the instructions from an anonymous call. That explanation, Ms. Delgado understood, would not stand up well if these customers pressed charges. The couple headed home that evening, battered with exhaustion, heartbreak, and an overwhelming sense of injustice. On the ride back, Zara scrolled through her phone, searching for any sign that the airline might have sent them an apology. Nothing. No calls, no emails, just a cold final notice on the app that their flight status had changed. By the time they got home, Lionel's phone buzzed with messages from worried relatives asking why they weren't sending pictures from the airport lounge. It was humiliating to explain that their flight had been cancelled for them effectively. Nevertheless, the resilience they'd developed in life and love pushed them forward. After discussing it over a late takeout dinner, pizza half-eaten between tears, they decided to set a plan into motion. Lionel drafted a concise but pointed email to a contact named Jonathan Pierce, an influential figure at the Philanthropic Fund that supported numerous industries, including aviation. The subject line read, "Urgent Airline. Discrimination incident. Requesting re-evaluation of support." The text described the humiliating experience at the gate with a firm mention of the couple's unwavering suspicion that they had been victims of racial profiling. Lionel attached screenshots of their purchase confirmations, seat assignments, and even pictures of the lounge passes they had used. He concluded with a request for an immediate conversation on whether the Philanthropic Fund ought to continue to support an airline alliance that tolerated such discriminatory practices. Zara leaned over his shoulder. "Do you think it'll work?" Lionel nodded. "I think it'll raise flags in the right circles. We have to try. We're in a position to do something. Not everyone is." Jonathan Pierce wasn't just a minor functionary at the philanthropic organization. He was on the board that specifically allocated funds to multiple corporate social responsibility (CSR) initiatives. Early the next morning, he read Lionel's email with mounting alarm. He'd known Lionel by reputation, an up-and-coming entrepreneur with a strong sense of ethics. He also knew the Philanthropic Fund took discrimination cases very seriously. By mid-afternoon, Jonathan had forwarded the email to the fund's executive committee. Within hours, phone calls were made to the offices of several major airline alliance members, chief among them United Airlines, given that they were part of the Star Alliance. In the world of corporate funding, A single red flag about discrimination could send shockwaves. If the philanthropic fund pulled out or threatened to do so, it could dent the airline alliance's carefully curated image and financial stability. While these boardroom maneuvers unfolded, Zara decided to share her story on social media. She posted on her personal page, "Denied boarding on our honeymoon flight, told we looked suspicious. Our documents were legit, but we're black. This is 2025. When will it stop?" She attached a brief video snippet she had managed to record of the supervisor asking them to wait along with a photograph of Lionel's boarding pass. She ended her post with a plea for people to stand against discriminatory treatment. What started as a small post among her circle of friends exploded overnight. People shared it widely, calling for answers. Local news outlets and bloggers picked it up. Hashtags supporting Lionel and Zara gained traction. By next morning, the story had gone viral, catching the attention of mainstream media, and that was just the beginning. Meanwhile, executives at United Airlines held emergency meetings. Their PR department was in damage control mode. The consensus was that refusing service to a honeymooning black couple with no valid explanation looked absolutely terrible. Yet some at the top believed they could ride out the storm. As an internal email read, "These stories pop up all the time. They blow over if we keep our heads. But Ms. Delgado from HR, having reviewed the case, urged a more proactive approach." She sent a memo. "We need to issue a statement of apology and launch an internal investigation." The response from upper management was lukewarm. They worried that an admission of wrongdoing might invite lawsuits or a wave of negative press. Instead, they prepared a generic statement about possible ticketing discrepancies and a thorough ongoing investigation. Amid the swirl of media attention, Lionel and Zara felt both bolstered and exhausted. Friends and strangers alike were flooding their inboxes with messages of support. They had been offered rebooked flights by customer service, but it all felt like too little, too late. They were faced with a choice: accept compensation quietly or push this matter into a broader fight for accountability. One evening, Danielle, the same friend who had been at the airport lounge, visited them with a plate of home-baked cookies and a stack of well-wishes from wedding guests. She reminded them, "Your wedding theme was standing up for love. Right. You never wanted a wedding day that was just about rings and dresses. You said it had to mean something bigger. Maybe this is part of that." Zara's eyes shimmered with tears of gratitude. If anything, this ordeal had shown how widespread support could be for a cause worth fighting for. Within a week, news of Lionel and Zara's story spread across social media, local TV stations, and prominent blogs. The couple's post detailing their humiliating experience at Chicago O'Hare sparked outrage and support from people of all backgrounds. Recognizing the mounting pressure, Jonathan Pierce from the Philanthropic Fund organized a press conference at a modest event space in downtown Chicago. He invited journalists, civil rights advocates, and community leaders prepared to make a bold statement. On the day of the conference, the room was filled with buzzing cameras and murmuring reporters scribbling notes. Even from the stage, Lionel and Zara could see the curiosity in the crowd's eyes. Jonathan opened with a concise overview. The fund had been a major supporter of charitable projects sponsored by the Airline Alliance. However, in light of discriminatory behavior, it was time to question whether continued funding was justifiable. Zara's heart pounded as she took the microphone. Though her voice trembled slightly, she spoke with calm conviction. "We believed we were stepping onto a plane to start our honeymoon, not into a nightmare of baseless suspicion. We will not stand for discrimination, not for us or anyone else. The audience, visibly moved, erupted in applause that ricocheted off the walls. Next, Lionel explained how they had been arbitrarily flagged, suspicious urging for transparency and accountability within the airline industry. Jonathan concluded by announcing the philanthropic fund's decision to freeze future grants directed toward the airline until a thorough investigation was conducted. This decisive stance electrified the media present, transforming the couple's story into a symbol of corporate responsibility, or the lack thereof. The press conference ended amid camera flashes, phone calls, and a renewed sense that the fight against biased travel practices had only just begun. In the corridors of power at Star Alliance, representatives from other member airlines like Lufthansa, Air Canada, Singapore Airlines grew concerned. If one airline faced severe backlash, it could tarnish the entire alliance. Ties with philanthropic funds mattered greatly to them, not just for the money, but also for public image and community development programs. An internal summit was hastily arranged among top executives of Star Alliance carriers. Some pressed United Airlines to apologize publicly, hoping to stem the growing outrage. But a few old guard executives remained stubborn, claiming that a formal apology might open the floodgates for lawsuits. The tension within these closed-door meetings was palpable. Each airline weighed its own interests against the alliance's collective reputation. As Zara grappled with the media attention, memories of her own family's history surfaced. Her grandfather had marched for civil rights decades ago. He had faced water hoses, police dogs, and vitriol. Thinking about him, Zara felt an even deeper resolve. She told Lionel one night when Grandpa marched, he did it for the hope that future generations wouldn't face the same indignities. And here we are, struggling with the same prejudice, just delivered differently. Lionel kissed her forehead. This is a chance to make a difference. Maybe we can set a precedent that says no more. Days after the press conference, a statement from United Airlines circulated online. It read, "We regret any inconvenience that Mr. and Mrs. Montgomery may have experienced due to an unexpected ticketing issue. United Airlines does not condone discrimination of any kind and is investigating the matter thoroughly to ensure our protocols were followed correctly." It was a lackluster response. Inconvenience. Zara thought bitterly, hardly began to describe the humiliation. Moreover, the statement pinned the blame on ticketing issues rather than acknowledging the real problem, racial profiling. The public saw right through it. Social media comments flooded in, decrying the airline's refusal to take responsibility. Just when their spirits began to flag, a surprise message landed in Zara's inbox. It came from an employee at the airline who requested anonymity. The subject line read, "I saw everything you're telling the truth." The message explained that the gate manager had admitted to staff afterward that he'd been following an unverified call claiming that two suspicious black travelers might be traveling on stolen tickets. The whistleblower wrote, "He never checked to verify if the call was credible. He panicked and decided to remove you from the flight. The policy used was a complete misuse of the security protocol. I'm sorry this happened." The email concluded with an offer to provide, if needed, an internal record that documented how the manager ignored standard procedure for verifying potential fraud. That record confirmed that Lionel and Zara's tickets were indeed fully valid from the start. Armed with the whistleblower's message, Jonathan Pierce requested a meeting with the Philanthropic Fund's Executive Committee. Lionel and Zara attended as well. They presented the newly uncovered evidence, effectively proving that the airline's official explanation was inconsistent with what had really taken place. The Executive Committee, outraged, voted unanimously to freeze all future grants and funding allocated to that airline within Star Alliance. They drafted a public statement asserting, "We will not in good conscience continue to invest in an airline whose practices harbor prejudice until they demonstrate tangible reforms and accountability." That same day, the philanthropic fund's announcement reverberated through business news channels. Shares of United Airlines dipped. Investors worried about a domino effect. If one philanthropic organization pulled out, others could follow, especially if they too encountered negative public perception. Events took a twist when a local journalist uncovered that the anonymous caller who reported Lionel and Zara as suspicious was none other than a disgruntled ex-employee of a private security firm contracted by the airport. This individual had a history of questionable calls that sometimes targeted people of color. In the past, the company had overlooked the pattern, but with the media spotlight shining bright, they could no longer ignore it. The revelation ignited debates on mainstream news. How much do we rely on unverified tips to justify discriminatory practices? Asked one commentator on CNN. Another on MSNBC added, "This incident is a microcosm of a larger systemic issue. How many innocent travelers are flagged every day based on stereotypes, not facts?" While most of Lionel and Zara's relatives supported their quest for justice, a few worried about the stress. Lionel's mother, Pamela, fretted that the couple might be exposing themselves to danger. "We're not living in a time without consequences," she warned. "Companies have power. They can get petty. I don't want you to get hurt." Zara's father, an attorney, insisted they stand firm. He provided guidance, reviewing every statement they made publicly to protect them from potential legal entanglements. "If we let fear stop us, nothing changes," he said simply. A group of civil rights attorneys approached Lionel and Zara with an idea: a discrimination lawsuit could force policy changes more effectively than any apology or settlement. They explained that, although lawsuits could be lengthy and emotionally draining, the public impetus was strong and the evidence was damning. Especially with the internal records shared by the whistleblower, a successful suit seemed highly likely. After heartfelt discussions, Lionel and Zara decided to proceed. They filed a formal complaint, alleging that United Airlines had violated Title VI and Title 22 of the Civil Rights Act. The lawsuit sought not only damages, but also a legally binding commitment from the airline to revise training protocols and disciplinary measures against discriminatory acts. By this point, the story had evolved beyond one couple's ordeal. Activists and communities across the country saw it as a rallying cry against racial profiling in travel. A new hashtag emerged: "Flying while black." Other travelers began sharing their accounts of unfair treatment at airports. Everything from being forced to remove headscarves to repeated random searches at security gates. Meanwhile, Zara and Lionel found themselves in a whirlwind of interviews, from local radio stations to national morning shows. At first, it felt overwhelming. They were thrust into the public eye while still nursing the wounds of disappointment from missing their dream honeymoon. Yet they reminded each other of the broader mission, stopping this from happening to someone else. As the philanthropic fund's announcement rippled through corporate circles, the entire Star Alliance experienced an unwelcome shock. Several big-name corporations put under review labels on collaborative projects with Star Alliance carriers, citing concerns about discriminatory practices. One energy sector company paused a major sponsorship that would have provided renewable fuel research funds to the airline group. The Star Alliance board demanded urgent remediation measures. They met with United Airlines executives, pressing them for a resolution, anything to quiet the growing outcry. The alliance's brand was at risk. "We can't let one airline's mishandling drag us all down," insisted an executive from Lufthansa. In a surprising development, an ally emerged from an unexpected place a senior pilot at United Airlines, Captain Robert Graham, a decorated pilot of 20 years, publicly released a statement condemning what had happened to Lionel and Zara. He wrote no passenger, especially honeymooners, on what should be one of life's happiest journeys, deserves to be turned away, without just cause. Racial profiling is beneath the values we strive to hold as airline employees. Captain Graham's statement went viral, drawing thousands of supportive comments. In a press interview, he recalled watching his own parents, an interracial couple, face discrimination when he was a child. "Enough is enough," he said. News outlets began focusing on the gate manager, the man who had denied Lionel and Zara their seats. Anonymous airport staff leaked that he had a history of complaint incidents, though none quite as explosive. Under the microscope, he faced suspension, pending the airline's investigation. In a desperate bid to save his job, the gate manager claimed, "I was only acting on the orders of my supervisor." But internal documents suggested otherwise. Emails revealed that the supervisor had asked for caution and verification, but the manager chose to escalate the situation, ignoring standard procedures to scan the barcodes or recheck the payment method properly. He had singled out Lionel and Zara in a manner that was neither justified by policy nor by factual information. Weeks into the crisis, an attorney for United Airlines approached Lionel and Zara's legal team with a settlement offer. It included a sizable monetary compensation and a vague promise of improved training programs. However, the settlement also came with a non-disclosure agreement, NDA, which would bar Lionel and Zara from speaking publicly about the incident or the terms of the settlement. Zara felt a knot in her stomach as she read through the proposal. It was tempting. The money could cover the costs of a new honeymoon. Maybe even a dream house. But accepting would mean silencing themselves, letting the airline bury the story. Lionel, ever the pragmatist, felt torn. They had poured energy and emotion into shining a light on systemic issues. Signing an NDA might undo the potential progress for broader change. After a long night of soul-searching, they declined the settlement. They would not be bought into silence. Their attorneys relayed the refusal along with an updated demand. Any resolution must include a public apology, a clear policy change against discrimination, transparent staff training, and accountability for those involved. The airline's legal representatives were stunned. They had assumed the couple would jump at the financial offer. Little did they know the depth of Lionel and Zara's convictions. Between all the media appearances and the legal battle, Zara and Lionel had little time to mourn their lost honeymoon. The days they were supposed to have spent strolling along white sand beaches under the Asian sun were replaced by anxious phone calls and scanning news headlines. If it weren't for the unwavering support of family and community, they might have sunk into despair. But each time they felt overwhelmed, they drew strength from the knowledge that they were part of something bigger. Now, their personal heartbreak had ignited a movement that challenged an entire industry's complacency regarding racial bias. Public outrage did not relent. Another major philanthropic foundation announced they too were reviewing their grants to Star Alliance partners. A technology giant known for championing social justice paused discussions about sponsoring airport Wi-Fi projects through a Star Alliance marketing deal. The alliance's brand was in free fall, and journalists labeled the fiasco Honeymoon Gate, a scandal with real financial consequences. Under mounting pressure, the alliance's top brass decided it was time to issue a unified statement. They expressed regret for any discriminatory behavior by any member airline, promised to overhaul anti-bias training, and said they would work tirelessly to rebuild trust. But the statement, though broader than United's initial response, still stopped short of a direct apology to Lionel and Zara. As the lawsuit progressed, the discovery phase forced United Airlines to turn over internal communications. Lionel and Zara's legal team reviewed documents that showed senior staff had initially considered a more straightforward apology, but the risk management department advised against it. They feared it would be interpreted as an admission of guilt. Instead, they formulated a strategy to downplay the couple's story as an isolated incident. However, one glaring detail in the documents stood out: an email chain referencing the call that labeled Lionel and Zara two suspicious travelers. Another line in an internal directive suggested staff err on the side of caution, hinting that appearance-based suspicion had been used. This was a smoking gun for discrimination, shining a harsh light on the airline's poor handling of anonymous tips. Meanwhile, the gate manager who had been placed on administrative leave found his career prospects crumbling. He was a mid-level employee who had angled for promotions by appearing strict and no-nonsense about security, but the wave of negative press left him a scapegoat for the airline's missteps. Colleagues stopped talking to him. Several friends in the industry told him privately that no airline would want to risk hiring him after such a PR disaster. The ramifications of his snap judgment spiraled far beyond losing just one promotion. It threatened his entire livelihood. His personal life took a hit too. Family and neighbors recognized him from media coverage, some condemning him for racist behavior. Later tonight, he wrestled with regret, though he still tried to rationalize his actions. "I was just doing my job," he repeated to himself. But with each passing day, the words rang more hollow. High-profile figures chimed in on social media. Celebrities expressed solidarity with Lionel and Zara. A famous singer tweeted, "No honeymoon for them because they look suspicious. This is America. What year is this? Again. Flying while black." Enough eyes enough? The tweet gathered millions of likes, amplifying the conversation even more. In response, the airline's PR department scrambled to release carefully orchestrated statements. They highlighted their track record of diversity, their donations to various causes, and insisted they had zero tolerance for discrimination. But with so much compelling evidence to the contrary, these platitudes fell flat. Amid the swirling chaos, a new figure stepped up to negotiate a vice president of corporate ethics at United Airlines named Charlotte Green. She invited Lionel and Zara to a private, off-the-record conversation. There, she offered a heartfelt apology and laid out a new proposal: a thorough third-party review of the airline's boarding and security procedures, mandatory anti-discrimination, training for all gate staff, and a public acknowledgement of wrongdoing in this particular incident. To Lionel and Zara, this sounded like genuine progress. Charlotte's sincerity seemed real, contrasting sharply with the earlier standoffish approach. "I can't promise an easy fix," she said, "but I promise we will no longer ignore the mistakes made." Still, the lawyers advised caution. They wanted to see specifics, a timeline, and binding commitments. While Lionel and Zara appreciated Charlotte's sincerity, they had come too far to settle for words alone. They needed a guarantee that policies would change, not just for them, but for all passengers who might face discrimination. In the future, United Airlines top executives mulled over the conditions. They realized that ignoring or downplaying the problem any further risked permanent damage to the brand. And behind the scenes, Star Alliance was pushing them to resolve the crisis, quickly threatening sanctions if the fiasco continued to tarnish the entire group's reputation. The day the lawsuit was set for a preliminary hearing, tensions ran high. Outside the courthouse, protesters gathered holding signs reading "Stop Racial Profiling" and "Justice for All Passengers." Journalists swarmed. Lionel and Zara, hand in hand, walked through the throng heads held high. This was an important moment. If the judge allowed the case to move forward in its entirety, the airline faced a potentially massive legal reckoning. Inside lawyers for the airline tried a last-minute tactic. They asked for the case to be dismissed, arguing that the couple had been offered alternative flights and that no permanent harm occurred. But Lionel and Zara's legal team presented the whistleblower's testimony, internal emails, and the broader context of repeated civil rights violations. The judge, stern-faced, rejected the airline's motion to dismiss trial. Preparations would continue. Just as public pressure was peaking, more airline employees started coming forward with stories of managers pressuring them to racially profile current and former staff, spoke of unspoken codes where certain travelers were labeled suspicious without evidence, purely based on bias. Though not all tales were as blatant, the pattern suggested a corporate culture that sometimes favored profiling over fairness. For Lionel and Zara, these revelations felt bittersweet. On one hand, they were disheartened to learn how widespread the problem was. On the other, it validated their stand. They weren't just troublemakers or overreacting. Their experience fit into a systemic pattern. All the mounting evidence combined with unrelenting negative publicity forced the airline's hand. United's top leadership convened a final decisive meeting. They had lost philanthropic funding, faced internal crises, risked a trial that could cost millions and cause irreversible brand damage. So they chose a path rarely traveled in corporate scandals: unconditional accountability. A press conference was scheduled more highly publicized than any prior statement. This time, the CEO of United Airlines himself would speak rather than hiding behind PR staff. Several tumultuous weeks and countless headlines later, United Airlines announced an unprecedented press conference to address the case that had rocked its reputation. The world's eyes were fixed on the airline's CEO, who stood before a throng of reporters outside the company's headquarters. Next to him was Charlotte Green, the Vice President of Corporate Ethics, and behind them a large corporate banner proclaiming the company's values: integrity, safety, and respect. For many, watching those words rang hollow until proven otherwise. Clearing his throat, the CEO began. On behalf of United Airlines, I want to issue a sincere apology to Lionel and Zara Montgomery. Their honeymoon trip was unjustly denied because of poor judgment and racial bias. We take full responsibility for our role in this unacceptable incident. The admission stunned the crowd as cameras flashed and microphones jostled for a better angle. An uneasy hush hung in the air. Rarely had an airline executive so publicly and explicitly acknowledged racial discrimination. He went on to outline a concrete plan for reform: mandatory anti-bias training for all gate staff, a third-party oversight committee to review security protocols, and an open-door policy encouraging employees to report any incidents of racial profiling without fear. Each promise sounded decisive, aimed at convincing the world that the company intended real change. Charlotte Green spoke next, confirming that the airline would publicly share quarterly updates on its progress and work closely with civil rights organizations to prevent similar incidents. Across social media, reactions poured in, some praising the airline for finally admitting fault, others skeptical that corporate promises would turn into lasting results. For Lionel and Zara, who watched from home, it felt like the ending to one painful chapter and the beginning of another, ensuring that these reforms truly materialized, so that no traveler's right to equal treatment would ever be so callously denied again. In the days that followed, the philanthropic fund signaled it would reassess the possibility of restoring support if the airline's new policies were properly implemented. Several corporate partners resumed halted talks, albeit cautiously waiting to see proof of real changes. Even the stock price began to inch upward. It seemed that genuine accountability, though painful in the short term, might be the only way to begin repairing the airline's damaged reputation. With the public apology now on record, the lawsuit approached a settlement that demanded more than money. United Airlines agreed to pay damages to Lionel and Zara, an amount that, while undisclosed, was rumored to be substantial. But the key aspect was the airline's commitment to reforms: mandatory anti-bias training for all customer-facing employees, the establishment of an independent watchdog group, and monthly progress reports filed with the Civil Rights Commission. Lionel and Zara's attorneys hailed it as a landmark agreement. A judge would keep the case open for periodic review, ensuring the airline stuck to its promises. The couple's refusal to be silenced by an NDA meant they could remain active voices in monitoring the airline's compliance. Their victory, in short, would not be a private hush-hush matter. It would stand as a precedent for future travelers who faced discrimination. Finally, months after the original fiasco, Lionel surprised Zara with a new set of plane tickets, courtesy of an airline from a different alliance. They decided to keep the destination the same Tokyo, then onward to a paradisiacal island. The difference was that this time they insisted on paying themselves. They had no interest in freebies from any airline, not even one trying to make amends. Their honeymoon would be on their own terms. As they boarded their flight, the cabin crew, aware of who they were, greeted them with warmth. The journey felt surreal, a mix of sweet relief and lingering wariness. But as the plane ascended, Lionel and Zara clasped hands, letting the tension of the past months fall away with each passing cloud. When they finally set foot on the island, beach turquoise waters glimmering before them, Zara took a deep breath of salt-tinged air. She turned to Lionel, her face glowing. "We made it." He slipped his arm around her waist, gazing at the endless horizon. They were here at last, not just physically, but in a place of mental peace they hadn't tasted for a long time. They spent their days exploring coral reefs, sampling local cuisine, and enjoying morning jogs on the beach. Evenings were quieter, filled with introspection. Occasionally, a flicker of memory about the ordeal would try to intrude, but they would banish it with a shared smile, reminding themselves that they had fought for something greater than just a smooth plane ride. They fought for dignity for themselves and others. By the time they returned stateside, Lionel and Zara knew they'd transformed. Their experience taught them the power of resilience. Together, they had forced a corporate giant to confront its biases and promise sweeping reforms. In interviews, they often said, "We wish none of this had happened, but we're grateful for the chance to make real change." Their words resonated. They received invitations to speak at conferences on civil rights, corporate ethics, and even investor gatherings focusing on socially responsible investments. Meanwhile, the airline's reforms were not a one-and-done matter. Investigations uncovered pockets of latent bias requiring new hiring practices and staff evaluations. The gate manager who started the fiasco was dismissed, though some felt he had become the scapegoat for deeper issues. Ms. Delgado and Captain Graham joined the new oversight committee, determined to ensure the airline lived up to its commitments. There were stumbles, but momentum toward change was real. Star Alliance, too, emerged, shaken but wiser. Watching United Airlines nearly implode taught the alliance that ignoring systemic problems could lead to catastrophic backlash. They instituted alliance-wide guidelines discouraging profiling, establishing a uniform code of conduct for member airlines. While far from perfect, these steps marked progress. Passengers worldwide, especially people of color, hoped the rhetoric of never again would actually hold meaning. The philanthropic fund, with Jonathan Pierce at the helm of the aviation investment sector, rolled out an initiative called Clear Skies, which provided scholarships and leadership training for employees of color seeking careers in airline management. Lionel and Zara participated as ambassadors, sharing their journey and insights. Their activism continued at a steady pace, influencing how corporations approached civil rights concerns. In private moments, Zara still wrestled with anger. She'd replay the humiliating scene at the gate, the manager's dismissive glare, the silent stares of onlookers. But each time, she would ground herself in the reality of how far they had come. Love, justice, and unwavering determination had turned a honeymoon nightmare into a call for corporate accountability. Lionel found healing in journaling. He wrote about the complexities of fighting for justice, how it could warp dreams, drain energy, and test even the strongest bonds. Yet he always ended each entry on a hopeful note, believing that every victory against prejudice, no matter how hard won, chipped away at the walls of systemic injustice. When people asked what they would do with the settlement money, Lionel and Zara replied that they'd invest most of it into philanthropic ventures supporting racial equity, especially within the travel industry. The rest, they said with a smile, might fund a second honeymoon someday, one free of drama-tears or gate agents who saw them as suspicious. In the aftermath, a renewed sense of hope blossomed. Their story demonstrated that ordinary people armed with truth, resilience, and the willingness to act could spark monumental changes. Although their honeymoon seats were initially denied, their experience became an indelible chapter in the fight against discrimination. Their love story had transcended personal romance and forged a path toward justice for countless others. This extraordinary journey began with a dream honeymoon, derailed by discrimination, and ended with a worldwide spotlight on corporate accountability. Lionel and Zara turned heartbreak into action, refusing hush money and demanding real reforms. In doing so, they inspired a global conversation about dignity, fairness, and the responsibility that major corporations hold toward their customers. Today, their legacy endures through updated policies, philanthropic initiatives, and a vigilant community that keeps watch for injustice. It's a reminder that change isn't always comfortable or immediate, but when driven by love and determination, it can be powerful and lasting. If their story moved, you make sure to like this video, share it with friends who need to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that spark hope and transformation. Let's keep the conversation alive and commit to building a better, more equitable world together.